So we have invited all of you here gathered by Zoom because we are urgently encouraging all tribal members and leaders like you across Alaska to unite your voices and have the opportunity to tell and share DOJ, Department of Justice, what your needs are, critical needs are in the field of juvenile justice that you work in. Your participation is absolutely important to the whole OJJDP's funding process and other training activities. Um, Basically, the resource basket team is here to help all of you, acting as an anchor to bridging you with proper guidelines and resources, technical assistance, and other testimonial tips in preparation for the big day, the June 25th OJJDP Tribal Consultation event. And for today's agenda, Kimberly, Kara, and Keisha will go over a brief overview of the DOJ Tribal Consultation Policy. They will share a little background of the JJRA, Juvenile Justice Reform Act, the framework for the tribal consultation with OJJDP, and a few other documents. And lastly, we'll conclude the session with Q&As, so that'll be about 15 to 20 minutes long. So please, if you haven't already, register for the OJJDP Tribal Consultation today. I will provide the registration link and its sources provided in the chat box. So at this time, while I'm doing that, I am going to have Kimberly take over the mic as she goes in depth with the documents and other needed items for this pre-consultation session. Okay, showtime, Kim.
Good morning to everybody. I just wanted to let you know that there's still time to register for the consultation. It's scheduled in next week on June 25th, and Laura's going to give you an example of the registration. I think she's going to post that up in the window here.
Can everybody see this? This is what the registration page looks like. And I've just sent everybody in the chat box the invitation link. And for those on the phone, the link is really long, but you can visit their page. It's at www.ojjdp.ojp.gov events/OJJDP tribal consultation. So I can just provide that a little more later.
Okay, so we're going to do a follow-up email after this consultation, after this meeting, so that you will have the information at your fingertips. And so I wanted to also encourage you, if you haven't already, it's always an ongoing reminder, is we have a resource basket website that's specifically focused on tribal youth and healing to wellness works. So wanted to remind you to subscribe to that. The other thing that I wanted to make you aware of is, well, I wanted to thank you actually. And I wanted to recognize and acknowledge all these grantees that are focused on tribal youth program and also healing to wellness courts. I think it's really important and see you all as on the cutting edge and leading the community and the tribes to have more focus on troubled youth, troubled Native youth. It's been historical that tribes in Alaska have focused on child welfare and ICWA, you know, those children that are removed from their families. And so we've been focused in the court, our courts have been focused, our tribal courts have been focused on child abuse, you know, intervening, preventing, working with families and healing. And what is really important, I think, about the work that you all are doing is that we haven't in Alaska really developed that much juvenile justice, tribal juvenile justice programming. And you know, so it's really good that you have undertaken that work, and are shifting focus on, you know, hopefully as much focus as we've had in the past by tribes on child abuse, to the needs of juveniles, tribal juveniles. And so really appreciate that the work that you are doing. It's very cutting edge, it's very new, and I just encourage you to keep at it, because we're at some point, I believe the tribes will be as focused on juvenile justice as they have been on ICWA. So with that in mind, so I wanted to talk a little bit about consultation and what it is and what it isn't. And so most important, I wanted to share information on the history of tribal consultation in Alaska. And the reason to mention that is because, you know, tribes were very effective in getting funding from DOJ and attention in the 1990s. This was quite a while back, but under the Clinton administration, and when Janet Reno was the Attorney General, the Clinton administration passed an executive order, and basically to coordinate and to consult with tribes. And this followed a meeting in the White House, the first meeting that was ever held with tribes in the White House for like over 70 years. So what happened, and I was really lucky to be part of this movement for tribal consultation. Basically, there was the first one was held in New Mexico, and then since almost half the tribes in the United States are in Alaska, Alaska leaders said we need to have, we're like a whole nother country in Alaska in terms of land size, and you know, 229 tribes, and Alaska leaders requested that that a separate or an additional consultation be held with Alaska tribes. And at that time, it was a really unforgettable, in the sense that consultation involved a whole week. And the consultations were held in Anchorage, Akiachuk in Western Alaska, Sitka in Southeast, Fort Yukon in Interior. And so it was really important. And if you are interested, I have the summary of that. It's almost a historical document right now, but for, you know, it might be, I was kind of looking through it, and I was noticing that a lot of the issues and the comments and the input provided by the tribal leaders at that time were kind of similar to the same things. And it kind of showed to me that, you know, we're still working on a lot of the same issues. And the reason I wanted to bring up the tribal consultation in Alaska was to, so that you will understand, especially the younger folks, that tribal leaders are, have been in this fight, I guess, if you will, advocacy, for quite a while, and it wouldn't be our first rodeo, you know, for many of you. And so I just wanted to pass on that experience. And then I don't know if Lisa Lang is the Healing to Wellness Court judge, I believe, out of Tlingit and Haida. And I don't know if she was able to join by phone.
Oh, I'm on Zoom.
Oh, you are? I'm sorry. I didn't see you. So I also wanted someone from the grantees, you know, and this is for everybody, but I wanted Lisa has been very involved in the OVC consultations, and just wanted to, maybe you could share how to do it, you know, your experience.
Can you hear me, Kim? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I think the consultations are taken very seriously, and they're, I wanted to just share, since that's the point that we're talking about. I'm calling in from Heidelberg. I live in my village, but I work with the tribes that are developing. Tlingit and Haida is developing the Tribal Wellness Court, and Fran Andrews, our administrator, is online, and Michaela Demert is also online, who is the program person. It's a innovative, exciting time because we're moving away from the adversarial type of law and into our own tradition and customs. So we're really working hard on that. But getting exactly to consultation, I can speak to, I want to share this with the people that are online, especially the people in the administration for Department of Justice. The key person I work with is Fran Andrews, and the very first thing that we did for consultation was to speak to our leadership. See, we go on autopilot because we are not allowed to represent or to speak on behalf of our esteemed tribal president or our tribal council. The executives there have a very streamlined manner of doing things, and so she already did this. We got a call, will you participate in the consultation? Yes, we will. Let me get back to the president and the executives, mostly the president, because he can give us this approval, but we have to have the approval from the top, because traditionally, and you know, at Tlingit and Haida, our president is tasked with unimaginable calls for his presence, and so what he'll do is he will look at the request from Francis, and he'll say, well, she's my tribal court lead, she's running these programs, she's doing this and that, and this Lisa, yes, Lisa does work in this, and you know, blah blah, and looks at who it is, and we get his approval. And I just really want to, I was asked to look at what is going on with this project because it's dear to my heart. It works. I can attest to that, and I thank you for asking, and I hope that starting right at the beginning of understanding these policies that are in place, actually in like VAWA, this is in the statute. The Justice Reform Act has consultation defined right inside of the statute, so it's clear. But maybe we are here too to begin there to reaffirm that you must have our leadership's permission. That is just the protocol for all tribes in the United States that I know of. We automatically defaulted to that, and we probably will continue to do that. But when the notices go out and they say, dear tribal leaders, they are referring to our leadership, and then the experts in the field, that would be Francis, that would be Michaela, that is the people that will represent us here at the table. And the reason that I say that is because if you're around long enough with consultation, you need to look at things like definition of tribe. I need to go back through the documents and see where I'm ensuring that we are getting our leadership's input because we are representing tribes. In Alaska, it's very convoluted, it's very complicated, but there are nonprofits and there are others that or can have access to these dollars if they are fitted into definitions. So that's another area. Every person that's involved in these consultations will be looking at where those definitions are. And I bring that out only because that's really important in our state, in Alaska. We have improved our relationship with the state, and I give credit to our administrator, I give credit to our tribal president, but those are difficult situations. So when we open that door, I'm reading this, what I'm reading is it says, you have to have a state person or a state representative. Well, I would really want that defined as a tribal, either an appointee from the higher levels or the actual tribal president or a representative of the tribal council. And I think all of us that are in Indian country, are Alaska Native, always speak to those issues first and foremost, because we fight so hard in Alaska to gain from the benefits that we have oftentimes been excluded from. So we have to really look at definition. And for the consultation, I think right now, I'm just going to be very open and honest with you. A lot of us in Alaska, there's cities and there's urban areas, many subsistence areas. And so I just viewed this opportunity to share with you that I know my up north brothers and sisters are starting into the king salmon fishery. I know down here in Southeast Alaska, we don't open our fisheries till later, but subsistence has started. And so I would really want the agency to be cognizant about probably moving these into more of a winter time when we have time to not be out fishing or food gathering, or it sounds like such a crazy thing if you're not from a village, but it's like our grocery store is open and we have to go shopping. So that was just a consideration that I would, if you're not from Alaska, like Kim was saying, the visit to Alaska, I would urge you to come visit 4 of our communities. I would urge you to get a feel for the logistics of our communities, and then you can understand why we are asking some of these questions that we are asking. And I'm trying to stick to the consultation process. I think currently, unless you understand some of our logistics and the way that we're set up and the way we try to organize ourselves, it can be overly complicated. And the only thing I want to say in ending this conversation is that please take a look at the cultural outcomes. That's how I measure my leadership in my community. Are they getting our language? And that's really key in the courts. I wanted to add that's a very key component. And I don't see that, and I would probably advocate later. That's my own personal advocating though. We have a travel ban, so I know this is making it very difficult, but again, I would really invite the leadership from DC, because we have some stellar things going on, and I know that's difficult. So I'm looking at my notes because I went through and I just tried to take notes as I went along, and one of the issues I saw was the state funding, and there's some. I think I can make those comments later. I have some notes that I have that I need to ask the agency people, especially the financial people. And with that, I will just go ahead and close out and say I'm honored that you are listening to us, and like I have experienced. Oh, somebody's making noise. I've experienced these to be week-long processes with a time slot allotted for individual comments, and I'm really happy that people online can share these ideas and comments, because we are so far apart from each other, and many cannot be at the table. They just don't have the logistics, or else they're out busy with something else. So we represent our own selves in a respectful, good way, but we also will carry a message, you know, that may change the benefits for other smaller tribes, because we have many, many, many smaller tribes. I'll save my other question. I do have some questions, and thank you for calling on me, Kim. I appreciate that. It really allows me to say a few of these key points that I want shared with everybody that's on board listening. So, Jahoa. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted to, we can help each other, grantees, in preparing for this consultation, and Lisa's a great resource. So I, hopefully we after, even I would invite you to be in touch with each other in preparing for the consultation, and feel free to call on me or any of the staff at Rural Cap, just to be a sounding board, or it's part of our duty as training and technical assistance providers. I think with respect to anything that is affecting tribes, since these are our grantees, that we need to be responsive. And this has a lot of impact potentially in terms of the new law. So wanted to pick up on the point that tribal consultations are actually founded in law. There's a legal basis for them that's specific to tribes, and that the actual process is codified, as Lisa mentioned, for instance, in VAWA, tribal consultations are explicitly provided for and mentioned and required. And so you've seen a lot of OVC. You see a lot of tribal consultations being put on by the other sister agency in DOJ. The other thing I wanted you to realize is that this started with executive order, which is also a type of law. And so just so that you have an understanding that the tribal consultation and its process is founded and it has a legal basis on two types of law, which is the executive order, which is a type of law exercised by the executive branch and through the president. And on the other side would be, as we see, the tribal consultation that we're getting ready for is also a provision within the new Juvenile Justice Reform Act amendments. So just so that you understand, I think it's important to understand some of the history, and I just want to say that the tribal consultation that we had with Janet Reno back in 1990s was really a catalyst. In other words, if tribes hadn't advocated back then and really showed up for the consultation in force, then we wouldn't even probably have some of the grants that we have today, and the CTAS, and so on. So I just wanted to say that that tribal consultations get results, and it's an opportunity to lift our voice up, and we want to really encourage you to do that and continue this sort of tradition in Alaska. I'm going to go ahead and just really talk about a little bit about the policy. And what happened was that the executive order was issued by the president, and then under the Obama administration, the Attorney General at that time was Eric Holder, and he basically established a policy. So, so when Clinton passed the executive order, he just said that there needs to be consultation with tribes on a federal basis. And then as we went on, the directive was really, because there was a misunderstanding for a long time that only BIA had a tribal consultation responsibility. And then now with the executive order and the statute, all federal agencies, Fish and Wildlife, you know, a whole lot, were ordered to develop policies. And so I want to focus on the DOJ Tribal Consultation Policy, and you've got it posted, I think, on the screen. So with that, the important part of consultation, I'm just going to read a little bit, and it, you know, just towards defining consultation. Consultation is the formal process through which DOJ seeks tribal input regarding the development of new or amended policies, regulations, and legislative actions initiated by the department. So that is the tribal input is the key word. And then going on, the principle of consultation has its roots in the unique relationship between the federal government and the tribal governments of federally recognized tribes. This government-to-government relationship has a more than 200-year history and is built on the foundation of the U.S. Constitution, treaties, legislature, executive action, and judicial rulings. And that is kind of defined in the DOJ policy, and it's on page 4. So I just wanted to have you understand a little bit about the Alaska experience, and then the underlying policy that's governing the tribal consultation that's coming up, and also to mention that I believe this is the first consultation that the OJJDP has done, and so it's a really exciting opportunity. I know a lot of you probably weren't even aware of this new law, these amendments, and so it's a lot to take in, and at least you have a lot of documents that you can look at to kind of get prepared for. And before we go into the tribal provisions of the Juvenile Justice Reform Act of 2018, I wanted to do a little bit of an overview on what are just the requirements, you know. And so I think this idea of juvenile justice legislation was initially in 1974, I believe, signed into law, the first law of what was known as the Juvenile Justice Delinquency and Prevention Act. And then it, as time went on, I believe it was amended twice. And so it's really kind of, you know, tracing back to 1974, and the amendments that were made in 2018 are similar to a lot of the original act that was passed in 1974. But I would like to go into some of the core requirements of these amendments. The first are racial and ethnic disparities, and or what we call RED. And so this new law changes what used to be called the disproportionate minority contact requirement, and it's redefined it as what they call RED, racial and ethnic disparities. And it basically recognizes the impact on certain races and their over-involvement or disproportionate involvement with the state juvenile justice, and especially in Indian country in the lower 48, the involvement in the federal prison system. And so basically the states are required to collect and analyze race and ethnic disparities and collect data and analyze data, and to be able to identify specific points where this occurs. And this is a really a very important for defining the different parts of the state juvenile justice system and where there is disparity at what phase and at what point. And so it will be very important going forward to see what is revealed by this, because the data right now and the research right now just shows in Alaska severe disproportionality in the number of Alaska Native youth that are court involved or involved with the juvenile justice system. And so this is a very important aspect of the new law. The thing that the juvenile law has always done, the federal law, is require separation of youth by sight and sound from adults, like if children or youth are in adult jails. And so this goes further, and it's kind of the idea of de-incarceration of status offenses. So, you know, there is a move to, I guess, move away from mass incarceration of youth or de-incarcerate youth, especially for status offenses. That has been a standard for some time, that status offenses are those type of offenses that if they were committed by an adult, they wouldn't really be an offense. It has to do with those special offenses that kind of only youth can be guilty of or doing, like smoking, a status offense of running away, a status offense of underage drinking alcohol. Another is curfew. Sometimes it's truancy. It can be truancy, not attending school. So these are in the new law saying, like, this is a really, we really don't want to incarcerate youth who are committing status offenses. And then moving on to funding, there is a focus on evidence-based and promising prevention programs. Another provision is providing an opportunity under youth promise grants under Title V, which would basically be used to fund alcohol and substance abuse prevention or treatment services, tutoring and remedial education in reading and mathematics, especially child and adolescent health and mental health services, and leadership and youth development activities. And so that is another important aspect. The other, you know, a lot of the new law is directed at the states primarily, and then we'll talk about the tribal provisions. But the state is required now to basically apply scientific knowledge to which I think is kind of code for therapeutic type of programs or approaches and that to prevent delinquency, and that the plan would be filed, be publicly available, the state plan. And the next section or the next requirement is that the state, that this now requires the state to appoint tribal representatives to the state advisory group, which we call JJAC in Alaska, and it is operated by DJJ, the Division of Juvenile Justice here in Alaska. And right now, the state is recruiting for tribal representatives for this group. And so we'll, in our email, our follow-up email, I'll include how to apply, information on the recruitment and how to apply, because this is a very important group. They provide advice, and so basically, it says for a state in which one or more Indian tribes are located, an Indian tribal representative or other individual with significant expertise in tribal law enforcement and juvenile justice in Indian tribal communities. And so that is the sort of description, or this is who they're looking for, who they are looking for. And now this new law requires tribal representation on our statewide advisory group, which is known as JJAC. The other is that the state would designate one person to implement or administer the core requirements, and then an annual report that would be due from, I think it's the administrator, let's see, sorry. Okay, so the state is required to provide an annual report, and basically really quantifying the number of status offense cases, the number of juveniles released from custody, basically different data points that are really important. And, you know, it will be very helpful, because we're assuming that the racial data, data on tribal youth would be a big part of this. And then the other requirement is looking at recidivism and establishing that as a data point to look at how many youth return back to, are incarcerated or committed other future offenses. And then I guess there's a reference, there was a Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, and that has been reauthorized. So I just want to give you a context, you know, and I also wanted to point out a couple themes, because this is like global. This is what's required of all states. This is what is involved. But before we talk about the tribal provisions, so that you understand what the tribal provisions are fitting into. But some of the themes that I came across, first of all, in the actual new law, there are some really compelling statistics that are in the beginning of the actual law. And I would suggest that you pay attention to those because it's quite informative and it's quite shocking in some ways. And if anything, it would move communities to action the more they knew about, especially disproportionate representation, overrepresentation of Alaska Natives in the system. But one of the things that that I noticed is that the new law actually is interested and focused on the connection between child abuse victims who later become juvenile offenders. You know, the connection between child abuse and juvenile offenses or juvenile offenders is a very important connection. And I noticed that this law, one of the themes is that. The other theme that I see throughout this this new law is a focus on therapeutic approaches, and funding for that. And so I wanted to say that that's a very good fit for tribes. That I mean, this is kind of the direction that many tribal courts, tribal communities, tribal governments are already heading down this path of healing. And so I see a lot of opportunity there for tribes to bring forward their cultural programs and practices for that are therapeutic. And so I think that is another really important aspect. And again, some of the other themes that you see throughout is, I think, are really paying attention to sex trafficking, some concerns about sex trafficking of underage youth, I mean of young people, so I think that the new law is somewhat responsive to the actual trends that are occurring nationally and in Alaska. And when you get ready to prepare your testimony, I think it's really important that you take a look at some of the statistics. And the statistics, especially the racial data, and there have been really reports with by the GAO has looked at tribal youth specifically, as well as other reports that we can provide you copies of, because what it shows, and these are recent reports, is that Alaska has one of the most disproportionate rates. In other words, Alaska Native youth are incarcerated at a very disproportionate high rate of all the states. And so I think it's important to educate yourselves about the status of Alaska Native youth. And again, this connection between child abuse, because we're also Alaska Native children and youth are figure prominently in the number of cases that are in the child abuse or child welfare system. Almost 62% of all the children in Alaska, remember, are in state custody. And we're only 17%, Alaska Natives are only 17% of the overall population. So when I think about this connection between child abuse and juvenile offenders, how many of these children, these high number of children that are in child welfare system for being victims of child abuse, how many will go on, to become juvenile offenders? The crossing of the line from juvenile, from being a child abuse victim to becoming an offender is really, I think, an important connection. So I wanted to ask Kara and Keisha if you could maybe supplement or make some additional comments, because I might have missed some things on just describing the new law.
Hi, this is Keisha. I am with the State Relations and Assistance Division at OJJDP. I actually had a chance to travel to Alaska last June with a colleague, and we were monitoring some of the facilities there, and I got a chance to travel to the Juvenile Detention Center in Bethel, and we also traveled to the village of Shivak, and it was an amazing trip. It was eye-opening from the beautiful views to just the welcoming people that we met, and it really opened my eyes, you know, to the unique challenges, but also some of the unique successes that I saw there. The facility in Bethel was amazing in terms of incorporating a lot of different tribal cultural values, and that's the first time that I had seen that in a center like that. We were actually trying to get the director to come and speak at a conference that was supposed to happen in March, but because of COVID, it shut down. But I wanted to definitely highlight the great things that were going on there and make sure people knew of this work. So that's just saying I did get a chance to travel to Alaska, and I look forward to hopefully traveling again there soon. In terms of the tribal provisions, I don't think I have too much to add. I think you covered a lot. As you were speaking, it just reminded me that maybe we should get out some links to the participants about, like on our website, on the OJJDP website, you can access copies of the state plans that have been submitted specifically for the Title II funding and some of the pass-through funding that Kimberly was talking about. So you can see what your states have planned and put together, hopefully with some of your input. You can also see what some of the existing racial and ethnic disparity plans look like. So you can actually go to the website, click on Alaska, and look at these plans to see what has been submitted and what they're talking about, and potentially see where you can fit in. I will say that next year will be the time when the state is working to submit new plans. And so my hope is that as you all can, you know, you can potentially be a part of that. A lot of the state advisory groups are the ones that work to put that together with input from the different communities that they're representing. So yeah, it just reminded me that maybe we should, you know, talk offline about putting some of these links together so you all have additional information to contribute to the comments and remarks that you'll be providing to some of the consultation questions.
Thank you, Keisha. And Kara, did you have any additions? I was just covering, you know, the overall act of the new law, and then I was going to segue into the tribal provisions. Kara, are you there?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Kimberly.
Oh, sorry, no problem. I just wanted the additions, yeah.
Yes. My name's Kara, and I work with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Really, so very pleased that you all can join, and that, you know, we've had this chance to talk with you today. And very thankful to Rural Cap and Kimberly and Lisa. Very appreciative that you all are willing to share your knowledge and your expertise and all the history that you bring. And it's, you know, it's really wonderful to partner with you. I think that you've covered, you know, as you know, it's a very extensive document. The new law, the reauthorization, it's about 83 pages long. And, you know, certainly you can access it on the OJJDP website. We can send you out a copy of it. And there's a lot to, you know, understand and to read in there that affects, you know, juvenile justice around the entire country. I think, you know, I'm very hopeful that OJJDP is doing our first consultation, and I'm very hopeful that we'll continue to do additional consultations and, you know, be able to get input on a lot of different areas. Obviously, you know, a lot of input is needed. But for right now, you know, we're really, for this consultation, we're going to be concentrating on some specific tribal provisions that are new to the Act. A lot of the Act is, reauthorized, so it has been in effect for a long time, but there are some significant new provisions that are specifically related to the tribes, and I think we were going to, kind of move into that. Some of them are in the framing paper that we're also going to go over, and some of them, don't figure as prominently in the framing paper. So we did, we wanted to, just go over the tribal provisions with you and give you an overview of what's new. And then the framing paper is, I think the most significant thing. I do understand people are so busy, and you're in the middle of a pandemic, just like everyone else, and, running programs and, doing your subsistence. And so I think, it's probably a lot to expect that you would, really understand the new law. I think we are still really trying to understand it and all of what it means. But the framing paper was designed to be, relatively short and, to concentrate on some things that, again, that are new and that are, in this new reauthorization, and that we think, could have a significant impact on tribes. And, really want to hear your input on them as we, start to think about what actions are going to be taken. So there we go. That's nice. Kimberly was able to put the framing paper up there. And I also, I really want to make sure that we leave enough time for questions from you all. So Keisha, can I ask you to just kind of give a brief overview of the tribal provisions, and then I can talk some about the framing paper?
Sure, I can do that. So yeah, there's a few provisions there. The first one I would like to talk about just is this consultation that we're planning. So yeah, through the authorization, we're required to consult with tribes to help develop a policy around how we normally should be consulting and partnering and improving the partnerships with tribes. There's an annual administrative report that needs to happen. And within that report, they specifically are requiring us to provide information on pregnant juveniles in state, local, and tribal jails as well. And then also highlighting the funding that is being provided to Indian tribes under this act, which is something I'm really looking forward to, because I know this information is in a lot of different places. I think it'll be beneficial to all of us if we're able to have all of that information in one place in terms of the funds that are going out to support tribes in serving tribal youth. So we could really analyze that data and make decisions around that. Another tribal provision, which Kimberly already discussed, was the adding a representative, adding a requirement for a representative from an Indian tribe or someone who has significant experience in tribal law enforcement or juvenile justice in Indian tribal communities. So that is now a requirement. A lot of states have been doing that. In fact, Minnesota, I think, just named their state advisory group chairperson. He is a member of the Leech Lake Ojibwe tribe in Minnesota. So it's already been happening, but now we're making it, the authorization makes it a requirement. So we're interested in hearing from folks about what their experiences are, with being recruited or going through the application process to become a state advisory group member, and where it's been successful and where challenges are, and where we as OJJDP can help sort of facilitate meeting this requirement for states. The next tribal provision is around expanding state pass-through. funding opportunities. So as you may or may not be aware, through the Title II Formula Fund programs, which is the program that I mainly work with, states are required to pass through a certain percentage of funds that's based off of this calculation of, I think, the tribal youth population in a specific state. This pass-through, I think, as some have mentioned, can be kind of small in some states and large in others. So I think the lowest amount is maybe 219. The highest amount, I think maybe that's actually in the framing paper. I don't remember what that number is. Oh, 42,000 was the highest amount.
$3.
Yep, thank you. So those funds, and even looking at Alaska, I just pulled those numbers, and with Alaska, the Alaska numbers for 2018, here I have a lot of notes here. Oh, Alaska, yes, the set aside amount was $34,993 out of a total of approximately $400,000 that Alaska received. So the funds aren't that much, but what we have observed is that a lot of states are supplementing those funds and giving more funds to the tribe, like in the case of South Dakota. Yeah, so they're building on and matching and building those funds so more funds can go to tribes. The other requirements, there's one around a juvenile justice study that OJJDP must conduct. Part of that study should highlight the needs of tribal youth. And then I think Kara's going to talk a little bit more about the next revision around additional funding for tribal youth programs. And then there are two that are very administrative-y, but that just deal with how we're monitoring grants that go to states and Indian tribes, and then also how those grants are being audited from the OIG. But that's not really the purview of the OJJDP office. We're more focused on the ones that I previously mentioned. And so that's it for my review, Kara. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. So thank you to the folks at Rural Cap who are kind of, scrolling through the framing paper as we speak. So you can see that there's quite a few links that are embedded in the framing paper that'll take you to more information. There is another, significant tribal provision that talks about increased funding for tribal youth programs. And many of you who are grantees who are calling in, I'm sure, are very familiar with that. It's Purpose Area 9 in the Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation. And the funding levels have gone up and down over the last decade or more. I've been at OJJDP for about 10 years, and the funding levels have really varied quite a lot. There's been years when we've been able to make a significant amount of Purpose Area 9 grants, up to 40 or so. Maybe in the early days there was even more. And then there's unfortunately been some years when we only had funding to make, something like 5 awards. So that is a provision that talks about there being 11% of some funding set aside specifically for tribes. At this time, that is something that requires Congress to act on in a number of ways. But I think, we're open in the framing paper. You can see that, we're open for all kinds of comments, but we have some questions framed that we know we can actually make some decisions on and have the power to develop some policies around. So I'll just talk about the second part of the framing paper now, where it talks about discretionary grant funding. So again, the CTAS solicitation is a big example of that discretionary funding. And we've been, putting it out every year, and we have the 2 purpose areas, and we know that you all spend a lot of time on those applications, and we know particularly for Purpose Area 9 that year after year, we get many more high quality applications than we have funding to award, which is always extremely disconcerting for those of us who work with the tribal programs, and I'm sure extraordinarily disconcerting for those of you who spend a lot of time on your applications and are not awarded. So those are discretionary funds that are specifically only for tribes to apply for. We have a lot of other discretionary funding in OJJDP. We have a significant amount of mentoring funding. We fund juvenile and family drug courts. We have some fairly new solicitations that focus on the opioid epidemic. We have funding for children's advocacy centers, internet crimes against children, anti-gang, re-entry, and other kinds of juvenile justice system enhancements. But for the most part, those solicitations, which constitute the vast majority of the funding that comes through our office, are open to everyone. They're not specifically geared towards or they're not only geared towards tribes. They are, open to tribal applicants, but in general, we get very, very few tribal applicants for those programs. And there's a link inside the framing paper. You can see it if you're on, the Zoom. You can see it in blue font, and it's a GAO report, and it's a pretty extensive report. I link in the chat box, and it talks a lot about not just DOJ, but the Department of Health and Human Services, and the significant amount of funding that goes out that could be used to help address juvenile delinquency, that's the language that they use. But inside that overarching broad language, there's a lot of different programs. There's many, many programs that focus on prevention, on treatment, on wellness. And, what the report reveals is something that I think is not a surprise to those of us who have been working here and working with, and I'm sure it's not a surprise to you all, which is that unless these solicitations are specifically kind of sent out saying this is for tribes, that the tribes are not applying for them. And so the report, the report talks about why that is, why they think it is. They interview some tribal representatives and leaders. They interview some federal staff. And there's, I think what they've come up with is probably pretty accurate. But in our consultation, we really, I guess, want to be more specific about our programs in OJJDP and what it would, what we can do to increase applications for those other discretionary grant programs. So that's specifically one of the questions. Is, what can we do to encourage tribes to apply for all those other pots of money? And then also, what kinds of programs, what other kinds of programs are people, finding useful and hoping that we will find some funding for? And then, kind of what other kinds of assistance can we provide to help programs that are already in existence, to support innovative ideas, and to, possibly expand or create additional training and technical assistance opportunities. So those are the questions that are linked back to the discretionary grant funding and the GAO report. The other questions that are more linked to the areas that Keisha talked about earlier. And, they're basically asking, how this office can collaborate to implement these provisions, and specifically around, how can we support the involvement of tribal representatives in the state advisory groups? Those state advisory groups, are very significant in terms of, the way that our office functions and the relationships between OJJDP and the states. And so it's a new requirement, like Keisha stated, and we want to get your input and your thoughts and your ideas about the best way to, again, support that involvement. And then the other question is also about funding around, even though those Title II funds are relatively small for a lot of states, we wanted to hear any ideas or thoughts about how we can work with the states to improve your access to resources from those funds that come from us and from other state funds that could be helpful in meeting your needs, and what kind of barriers you have in accessing those kind of resources. And then, this is a kind of a large question, and we know that it's really different for each state. And but essentially, we're asking the question about how to help support and increase state tribal partnerships, so that those partnerships can be useful in meeting the needs of your tribal youth. So those consultation questions are, at the bottom of the framing paper. Those are questions that we know that our administrator is, wanting to hear feedback on and is poised to, act on whatever pieces of, your feedback she's able to act on. Of course, we also know that you have concerns and you have things that you want a chance to talk about. And, the consultation is there for that as well. So I will, I think we're at about 3:10 now.
Yeah, you're right. It's about 3:10, 11:10 here in Alaska time. We just want to have Kimberly, Kara, and Keisha just say a little final thoughts before we move on to the next segment for the question and answers part.
Yeah, I'll just go first, just to thank everybody again, and I truly hope that you'll be able to make the consultation. I'm going to put my email address in the chat box. If there's anything between now and then that would be useful from us in sort of soliciting your participation, or anything else that you can think of, please feel free to email me. And yeah, just really looking forward to any questions that you might have.
This is Kimberly. I just wanted to let you know that we look forward to not only the consultation, but I suspect that there will be a lot of opportunities to basically look at in having dialogue with DJJ, with the state more. This can go, a lot of the requirements of the new law are directed at the state, and I think it provides opportunity for more relationship building directly between tribes and the state. And that's always a good thing. We need more of that in Alaska. And so we hope to facilitate through our role as training and technical assistance providers, kind of keeping up, initiating dialogue to talk about these new amendments, but kind of like what they mean on the ground. You know what I mean? What do they really mean in tribal Alaska? And so, so just hopefully you don't look at this as a one-shot thing. We don't. And it's the new way for us here at the Resource Basket at RollCap, because we kind of had a lot of distance and you know, that kind of work on the back burner, because we like to come to communities and do the work on the ground in terms of training and technical assistance. But now we're shifting to doing more distance, like webinars, these type of meetings. And we're getting ready in the fall, kind of after subsistence, probably after moose hunting, to roll out what are known as learning circles. And so we'd like to get the grantees together and form more of a network. And so there's a lot of opportunities. There's still a lot of things to do. And I noticed that because I think I've called at least half of the folks that are attending just to let them know about this consultation. And it seemed like everybody is kind of getting back at the same time, back to their office. And so I was really happy to hear that, you know, not everything stopped, you know, and that there's a resumption in work that I noticed, and we'll try to keep up with you guys. And so look forward to hearing more about learning circles, and they're going to be online, you know, it's going to be distant because that's our best tool right now. And come the day that we can do the on-site, and it always works best, you know, to do the work face-to-face and locally in Alaska. And so we look forward to be able to do that. But right now we want to respect the health of villages and their bans on travel, and their you know, their right to basically keep their community safe. So we will stay tuned till we can travel again. So I want to move on to the questions now. There are several in the chat if we want to start with those, and then Laura, I don't know if you can read those aloud. The questions in the chat box.
Yeah, they're not necessarily questions, they're more like thoughts. But if anyone has any questions, you can raise a hand, or I can just go ahead and read from the chat box.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just do. We've made everybody. We only have, you know, 20 minutes left, so let's go ahead and hear questions for whoever they might be. Please.
Or any final thoughts.
Questions, comments.
Hi, this is Sonia Scan. I'm calling. I have a Purpose Area 9 grant in KIC. We also have the grant for domestic violence grant. And I think I wrote in the chat box, and what I wrote was, it seems, and I was talking to my husband, who is actually our tribal council president right now, but I was talking to him about how a lot of the funding that we get is for after the fact, after something happens, not preventative. And so for me, you know, with the Tribal Youth Programming Grant is a prevention grant generally, but it's a lower funded grant for the most part than like some of the other grants that I see. And to me, I want to work on prevention. And that to me is very important for our kids. I have a lot of, you know, we're doing a lot of things to try to do that, and prevention for our tribal youth comes through knowing their tribal knowledge. So we know that. And so that's just something that I'd really like to push for, is more, to have it more focused on culture. And I think that Lisa said that at the beginning as well. We do things with language and culture, and it really does build on that prevention part. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Celia. Yeah, thank you. I think it would be great, you know, to hear more, you know, about those thoughts. I think a lot of people share them. And I think to the extent that you also can share any specifics about, programs that you have seen work or programs that you are wanting to fund that already have, maybe momentum in your community, but you can't find opportunities that support it. I think that's really important to share those specifics on the consultation. And also, you'll notice in the language, there is a very strong focus on crime victims and accountability to crime victims in tribal communities. And so I think, being able to talk about how you see the connection between prevention and, public safety is a really a key thing to be able to share. So yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to it. Nice to hear your voice, Sonia.
You too, Kara. And I will, I'll put something together of what we do and what we've been doing that's been very successful, and I will send that to you. And like was mentioned at the beginning, our tribal council for a tribal consultation, it has to come through our council, and they will pick a representative. And whoever that is, I usually can do a white paper or something for them if they need it.
So will it go through your tribal council if the invitation was kind of sent out on a listserv and it was posted at NCAI, or is there something that we need to do to make sure that it gets to the tribal council?
If you send it to me, I will forward it on to the tribal council people, or I will send you the email for them.
Okay, that's great. Maybe we can have Rural Cap send it out to everyone with a specific request that you bring it to your tribal council. Okay, that would be great.
That would be great.
So I just want to remind everyone that if you cannot attend the the tribal consultation online, OJJDP will also be accepting written consultation. So you can go ahead and just email them at OJJDP Tribal Consultation at OJP.us. I'm just going to put the link in the chat box right now.
And the comment period, the written comment period will extend for 60 days after the consultation.
Okay.
Yes, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me to this pre-consultation that we're going to be having, and I just wanted to give a little shout out to Cara that's helped us here in the Organized Village of Cake for many years and be part of what we're trying to do here to for prevention purposes for our tribe here and also our small village that I live in. And it's really nice to know that that there's funding, other funding for the tribe that hasn't really been kind of like looked at, like with the mentoring and stuff like that, because we're really into the prevention portion of it and intervention, so we don't have to wait until the damage is done with some of the youth that sometimes get in a little bit of trouble, and so if we can avoid some of that, these are some of the grants that we would like to really look at also, now that we know that there's more out there that really haven't been tapped into yet, and I think it would really be a benefit for us.
That's great. Thank you so much. Can you tell us your name?
Anthony Gastelum.
Hi, Anthony.
Cara, how are you? I was like, oh, it's Cara.
Good. How are you? Yeah, I was trying to write you a little personal message there. I couldn't find you. That's great. Yeah, really nice to hear your voice.
It's always nice to know that you guys are out there, still doing what you're doing. And
we feel the same way. Yep.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's kind of like, it's doing its full circle, and it's really nice to be part of that. And yeah, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you. I will say, I think it's really important what you brought up, the mentoring, because I think that that it would be useful if you specifically are interested in mentoring funding, if you could look, and I mean, you can just Google it. You can Google like OJJDP mentoring FY20 or FY19, and you can take a look at the solicitations that go out. And you might look at them and say to your, you might have some really good feedback about, we wouldn't have applied for this because of X, Y, or Z reason. Maybe some of the requirements, would exclude you, or maybe there's something about the way that the application is that, has kept you from, looking at it. Because I think that if you're able to be very specific in that way, to say, we really need mentoring funding, and we really are, would love to apply for this, and here's why we haven't. I think that would be information that would be very much welcomed and would be very useful.
Yeah, I've done 3 mentoring programs here in Cake since I've lived here in the past 15 years. And each one that I have done, and a couple of them were pilot programs, and actually they work really well with our youth here. And every one of the kids that were in our program, they all have graduated. They've all went to college and seek higher education, and it's made a really big difference. And so that would be something that I would really like to be part of.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Some more questions, comments. It doesn't have to be just questions, but
I have a question.
yes.
I have a question. This is Kailji's. It's about what works, successes, and I've found, I just want to share this, because when community is holding hands with the other services, inter-services, health services, housing services, and we come from small communities, so the greater ability to provide a wraparound service, whatever that is, in the communities seems to be of the greatest success that I've ever seen. The communities that are able to do that, and that includes the healing, and that I call, for me, is the tribal courts for youth, for drug addiction, for whatever. But that one fact, and when I was looking at it in my own home village, what I asked, I had a friend he's a PhD in statistics, and he came to our village, and I was like, wow, what do you do? And he said, you know what I need to figure out, and he used to volunteer here. He didn't come in and do it for money. But anyway, the point he made to me was, try to figure out a matrix for the impacts of language, of self-esteem, of culture. Lisa, he said, that's what people are looking for, is those numbers. And what are your ideas of successful outcomes? That would be someone who speaks my language. That is someone who understands our cultural customs, and whatever their life opportunity brought to them, do we view that as a success? Are they living a healthy, good life? Those kind of things are probably wrapped up in mentoring, prevention, and intervention, but I do know that they must hold hands with community-based support. You've got to go back to the village and say, what is your number 1 issue? What is your number 2 issue? And how do we collectively create solutions? I think that's really important to point out. And then looking at the policy requirements, I kind of look at things like a nerd, and I see a lot of financial additional burdens. They seem to be really scrutinized, and it's always been that way, but it seems to be a little tighter. And I want you to know that when anyone asks for additional requirements, I now have learned to say, what are the additional funding that is coming with that requirement? Because that requires pre-audit, that requires additional assistance. And so that's how my mind works. And I'm like, are they going to give us money to help us become well, like we did in my village, we learned to pre-audit. And so, I'm speaking more like this smaller level, because Tlingit and Haida is very proficient at what they do. I'm speaking more of a village level. Outline needs and define them. And then I think in our cultures, we are really focusing on revitalization. And with that comes powerful statistics that are saying, this is what we are seeking in our outcomes, not what DOJ seeks, which is great. I mean, we want children to come out of there. We want no longer to have to be in there. But what's so? And the last thing would be, you used to have a prior policy that really worked better, I believe, for tribes that were trying to continue programs. And say you got to the end of your program, and you got your court running, but then now you can't apply for this type of grant because technically your seed money's gone. And I would ask that there be a little visiting of re-implementing your prior policy. I think that has to be considered because it allows renewal of funding or access to the funding, because when you just get out of the starting gates, you need to have the ability to continue that. That's crucial. So
I just need to interrupt for a few seconds. We're approaching the 11:30 mark or 3:30 mark. I just really want to thank you, Lisa, for sharing your heartfelt message. I know this is very important for all of us. And thank you, Kimberly and Kara and Keisha, for joining us. And please, for all the other grantees online, if you have any other questions or comments, please don't hesitate to email Kimberly at kmartis@ruralcap.org, or to Kara at, everything is on our resource basket website, or to the event host at the email given on our link. So as OJJDP puts it, and I quote, your participation will contribute to developing informed tribal juvenile justice responses that enhance public safety, promote accountability, and empower tribal youth and communities, end quote. So I'm strongly encouraging all tribal members and leaders to please register for the June 25th Tribal Consultation event. So thank you, Kimberly. And if anyone has some very last minute final thoughts to share,
this is Kimberly.
Thank you.
This is Kimberly, if you want to do another one of these little Zoom meetings on this, feel free. We still have until next Thursday. So, we're here and we're working remotely, but we're still, we're still trying to keep up with you guys, okay? Thank you all. Koyana.
Thank you so much.
Are we hanging up now?
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And if Joy, Eva,
Thank you,
Kimberly,
everybody.
Kara, Keisha, and the Resource Basket Gang could just stay a little bit longer, that would be great.
I'm going to run to the bathroom. Okay.
All right. You got 2 seconds.
Okay. Thank you. I'll be fast.